half ago now, I got a chance to go out to California and interview Richard for some video that's in the Bond exhibit.
And Mark did a fantastic job.
You're too
He
kind.
really did. One of the best interviews I've ever had.
I appreciate it. You lie very convincingly, but
No, I'm telling the truth. I'm taking truth serum tonight.
All right. Well, we are delighted to be able to bring Richard here to the Spy Museum. Richard, of course, is best known probably to everyone, but certainly to this audience, as having played Jaws, a very memorable villain in 2 James Bond films. And I believe that I'm correct in saying, that I'm sure the audience will correct me if I'm wrong, that aside from Blofeld, you're the only villain to appear in more than one Bond film, and actually Blofeld was never played by the same actor twice.
Exactly. The only one played by the same actor.
Yeah. So you were Jaws in 2 films, The Spy Who Loved Me in 1977 and Moonraker in 1979, both movies about master villains who wanted to end the world. So I'd like to talk about
Take over the world.
So, yes, okay, take over the world. So before we get to that, and just briefly, and we'll have time for questions and answer here, so if anybody wants to elaborate on this, I think before you entered the Bond world, you actually had a very interesting career. So could you give us just like a 25-cent version of that?
Well, I did things like The Monkees, Gilligan's Island, My Mother the Car, Twilight Zone.
You were in a very memorable episode of Twilight Zone.
Yes, it was. It's considered one of the better shows because it kind of caught people up by surprise.
That was the To Serve Man episode.
Yeah, it's a cookbook.
Yeah. And you were in a film that I think you take some perverse pride in as well. It may have been your first acting role?
Well, it was one of the first. It was a movie called Ega, where I played a caveman. And it was supposed to be a very serious movie called Ega, The Name Written in Blood. And it turned out to be Ega, the Lovesick Giant. A lot of humor and a lot of pantomime acting. I think the whole movie cost $27,000 to make. And so I got a lot of good practice doing pantomime acting in a $27,000 movie that later on to do a $27 million Bond.
So the first Bond movie you were in was The Spy Who Loved Me, which was
Yes.
released in 1977. But when were you first contacted? When did you first get some sense that you were being thought about in connection with being a Bond villain?
Well, it was, I think, early '77. I was working at 20th Century Fox making a movie called The Silver Streak. And my agent called me. He said, Richard, Cubby Broccoli wants to have lunch with you. And I said, who's Cubby Broccoli? And he said, Cubby Broccoli is the Bond producer, dummy. And oh, wow. I was all excited. And
That's a call you ought to return.
yeah, and he said, see if you can get a long lunch tomorrow. He wants to have lunch with you at the Polo Lounge, the Beverly Hills Hotel. And so I went to the first assistant director. He said, can I get a long lunch tomorrow? Cubby Broccoli wants to have lunch with me. Oh, Cubby Broccoli. Oh, yes, of course. What do you need, 2.5 hours maybe? I said, oh, that'd be great. So I went out and I met with him. And this kind of rotund man with a very gravelly voice, sounded like Marlon Brando in The Godfather. He said, Richard, we've got this idea of this character from the Bond movie. He said he's going to have teeth, either like pliers or maybe like a shark, but he kills people with his teeth. I thought, oh my God, it's a monster role. Then he said, well, we've already interviewed David Prowse. He said, I met with him. And so, it was kind of like setting me up for the idea that, I was competing. And I thought, wow, David Prowse, nice guy, but...
Chewbacca in the Star Wars movies.
No, he was Darth Vader.
Darth Vader, I
You never know
apologize.
because you couldn't see him. and then he had James Earl Jones's voice.
Right.
And so I thought, they just want a body. But then a little voice inside my head said, Richard, you know how you love the James Bond movies. Figure out a way to make it work. And so I kind of took a chance, and I said, well, Mr. Broccoli, if I were to play this role, I'd want to give the character some human characteristics, maybe like perseverance, maybe like frustration, because I believe that in real life, villains have a mother, they have a sweetheart maybe, they have a bird, a dog, a cat, a parakeet or something. And he said, I like that. What are you doing for dinner tonight? And he invited me to his home to meet his wife, Dana, and his family, and the writer, who was living in a guest house by the pool, which is about twice as big as my house. And I guess I passed the test and ended up wearing those steel teeth.
So, since you mention it, tell us about the teeth. I have the impression you had a bit of a love-hate relationship with the teeth.
Well, they didn't hurt. They were molded to fit over your teeth. And they had like a rubber slip mold inside of them. But they were made out of chromium steel, cobalt steel. And they went up in the roof of your mouth. And they kept your mouth open so wide you couldn't talk. You barely breathe. And they were gagging. It was like swallowing a bumper, a chrome bumper. And so they could only be in for like a minute and 15 seconds or whatever at a time. And then they had to come out or you'd be throwing up all over the place. And so when the director would say, cut print, the teeth would come right out. And there was a little lady with a Tupperware container, and I would drop them in the Tupperware container. She had a bed of cotton on the bottom. And she would take them and rinse them off with mouthwash, and they'd be ready for the next take.
Did the fact that you were, had this thing in your mouth that was constantly on the edge of making you throw up sort of affect the character?
It made me very serious. Yeah, even when I was being funny, I had this serious, stoic look.
So speaking of that, talk to us a little bit more about the development of the character. I understand that sort of you and Roger Moore sort of played off against each other, sort of in a conscious kind of way to kind of bring out the relationship and the comic potentials of your character.
Yeah, well, Roger played along with what I was doing to make Jaws a little more interesting. I kind of patterned Jaws after the Coyote in the Roadrunner and the Coyote cartoons, because you really feel sorry for the Coyote. He's always being blown up, and but he
falling
keeps
off cliffs.
Yeah, falling off cliffs, and he keeps coming back. So that became Jaws' motto: to never give up, keep coming back. So I would brush off my clothes, straighten my tie, and I'd be off and running again. And Roger saw that, and he took advantage of my sense of humor with his own, and he would say things like, when the magnet sucked me up, how does that grab you? And or when I'm ripping the top off of the van and trying to get to them in Egypt, and Barbara Bach, this is real life. She's grinding the gears because in the Ford, English Ford van, you have to double clutch it in order to go from reverse to first and first to reverse. She didn't know that, so it was and Roger Moore's out on the running board giving her a place to look at. He was such a nice guy. And he says, you want me to drive? And the look on Barbara Bach's face, because it was not a line in the script. And she was so shocked. And she was like, and the director said, we got to get a close-up of that, a close-up of you, Roger, saying that line. But one of my favorite lines was in Moonraker, where I'm chasing them with a cable car. I'm in one cable car and they're on another, and they jump off, they drop down onto the side of the mountain and roll around and come up. And Lois Childs very seriously says, who's that? And Roger Moore says, his name is Jaws. She said, you know him? And he says, not socially.
Do you know him?
Not socially. His name's Jaws. He kills people.
I always thought that was a wonderful line.
And it's, my wife can tell you, my wife's over here, Diane, she's the blonde back there. We were watching a scene in the screening room, and when Roger is driving that underwater Lotus car out of the water, out of the ocean, and he drops the fish out the window. And we heard Cubby Broccoli say to a journalist, well, you know, that's not going to be the movie. That's one of Roger's little private jokes. And my wife said, gee, they should leave it in. It's very funny. And they did leave it in.
So you mentioned filming in Egypt, and there's
Can't do that now.
Yeah, indeed. There's a scene there where you try and hurl a big block, I think from one of the pyramids or something at Bond. Can you talk a little bit about the challenge of being a superhumanly strong character?
Right. You know, I learned the hard way. I had a long career before the first Bond film, 17 years. And then suddenly I became an overnight success. And during the long trip to get there, in my experience in the 17 years, I learned not to always listen to the director, because when I'd have some big heavy object, the director said, pick it up like it's nothing. And then it ended up looking like it was nothing, like it was made out of balsa wood or foam. And this block was made out of styrofoam, so it weighed nothing. And but I thought it'd be kind of fun to see what would happen if I pretended like it weighed, about 5,000 pounds. So I'm lifting it, and then when the van gets too far away for me to throw it at the van, I drop it on my foot. And I grab my foot and I start yelling in terrible pain. And people are saying, call the nurse, get an ambulance, get a doctor. And the director is rolling around laughing because he knows it's made out of foam rubber. But Lewis said, let's shoot one like that. And I said, well, yeah, I thought you'd like that, but why don't we shoot one like that, but then maybe shoot one a little more subtle, where I look down at my foot like, oh my God, what have I done? And that's the one we use.
Now, something unusual happens to your character at the end of the movie when you end, like so many people in Bond films, you end up in a tank with a shark. Do you want to sort of walk us through that? Because that didn't end the way it normally does in Bond films when people meet sharks.
No, I was supposed to die. And the English are a little different than the Americans in how they film it. They would have weekly production meetings and ask the department heads, how can we do this any better? Make it more fun, make it more interesting. How can we save money? Anybody have any good ideas? And the stunt coordinator, Bob Simmons, spoke up and said, Cubby, you sure you want to kill off Jaws? And Cubby said, well, we always kill the villain. And he said, yeah, but wouldn't it be kind of nice to have been able to bring Oddjob back? And Cubby said, well, Bob, he gets thrown into a tank with a shark. What do you suggest? And Bob Simmons said, he kills the shark. And Cubby said, I don't know. The whole new idea to him. And Bob said, why don't you shoot it both ways? And that way you have a choice. If you want Jaws to live, he can live. And if you want him to die, you can kill him off. So they decided to do that. And I had to film that alternate scene after the entire movie was shot, because you have completion bonds and the movie has to be finished how it's written. And so this extra day of shooting came about the final day. And my wife Diane was in starting her last month of pregnancy. And they wanted her to fly home way before that final day. And she didn't want to go home without me. So then they wanted her to stay in England and have the baby there. And she wanted to have the baby at home. And so Cubby, he was such a kind man. He was like a father to me and our family. He and his wife, we went out promoting the movie, and we were just like his own family, the way he treated us. He flew a doctor, his own doctor, paid him whatever he had to pay him, first class, got off the plane in LA, got right back on a flight without staying 10 minutes, flew back to England. And that's the kind of guy he was.
So when did you hear that they actually wanted you to come back for the second film?
Well, I didn't know. I didn't know if I was going to live or die. And my agent called me. He said, Richard, they want you to come out and see a screening. And here's a number to call. They want to talk to you first. So I called the number. They said, we'd like for you to come out to MGM Studios, and we're having a blue-collar screening. No producers, no writers, no directors, no actors. We're going to have like the security people, the lumber people, the prop people, their wives, children, and just a regular bunch of public. And we'd like for you to come out and watch the movie with them. And that was a chance to see the movie, find out whether I live or die. And they said, well, we want you to come at so-and-so time. Everybody will be in the theater seated. We want to bring you in the back door after the lights go down, so nobody will know you're there. So I did that, and the whole theater is dark now, and I go in the back door and sit down. And the movie starts, and every humorous thing that Roger and I had cooked up got big laughs, big reactions, and I was really, really pleased with the way it was going. And I thought, well, I wonder if I'm going to live or die. And then the underwater city starts blowing up and coming apart, and I'm thinking, wow, because it's taking a long time. And a lot of time goes by, and Bond and Anya are trying to escape and get out of this place. And so much time goes by, I think I must be a goner. And then all of a sudden you see the surface of the ocean, and Jaws pops out. And the whole audience cheered and yelled and screamed and applauded. And I thought, oh my God, I think I finally made it big as an actor.
So in Moonraker then, so Moonraker comes along, and in Moonraker, your character has kind of a life-changing event when he gets himself a girlfriend.
Yes, and again, interesting backstory on that. I was out of the country for quite a while making 2 movies, Forced In from Navarone, and an Italian Star Wars movie called La Humanoid. And incidentally, Barbara Bach was in both of those. And so we both got cast because of the Bond film. But I arrive in Paris with my wife and 2 children, and Diane's pregnant again. And I look up Bob Simmons, my friend, the stunt coordinator. I said, Bob, I haven't seen the script. Can you loan me a copy of your script? And he did. And it talked about Jaws having a girlfriend. And it described her as a statuesque, 6 foot tall, very lovely woman. And I'm thinking, this is great. And so I go to the studio the next day, and they said, Richard, boy, do we have a surprise for you. And I think, oh yeah, you think you do. They said, yeah, we found this 7 foot 8 inch woman. Oh my God. My wife's not quite 5'1".
Yeah.
They say opposites attract. And I think there's a reason for that. We have 4 lovely children and 6 beautiful grandchildren. And I can't imagine what would have happened with a 7 foot 8 inch woman. All the kids would have to have power steering. But anyway, I said, guys, that just doesn't work for me. And they had pictures of her, and she wasn't really, real attractive at all. So,
I'm sure she was a delightful person.
Oh, I'm sure she was, too. But it just, like I say, opposite attract, and she was not an opposite to me. And they said, oh, and the production manager, who always worked with Lewis Gilbert, the director, said, well, you signed a contract, and you have to do kind of what we want you to do. And I said, well, I haven't signed the contract. I had been out of the country making 2 other movies. I hadn't been back to the States, hadn't signed the contract. And all of a sudden they were, oh my God, what do we got going here? Then they took me and they showed me scenes they had already shot with stuntmen jumping out of airplanes and flapping their arms and all this stuff, skydiving thing. They said, Richard, we're going to make you into a star. And I said, well, that's great, but I don't have to marry somebody's ugly daughter. I'm sorry. And so they finally said, well, what would it take? What kind of a woman do you have to have? I said, well, how about a short one? And they said, how short? I said, well, I think she should be at least 5 feet tall. And they said, 5 feet tall? How you think? How would the audience couldn't believe that? I said, well, my wife's just a little over 5 feet tall. We have 2 children, 1 on the way. It works. So they said, well, okay, see what we can do. Anyway, Louis Gilbert, the director, then said, Richard, I've got this actress coming in. She'll be perfect. She's an old friend of mine, and she's a very good actress, and you'll like her. So this gal comes in, and she's probably 6, 7, 8 years older than me, and a good old friend of the director's. And she's absolutely trembling. She's so afraid of me. And I'm thinking, my wife's not afraid of me at all, believe me. She keeps me in line. And so I said, Louis, I said, I know she's a friend of yours, but she was actually shaking. She was trembling. And he said, oh, she'll be fine. She's a good actor. She'll be fine. So I thought, oh, my God, I went from, bad to worse here. And I went to the camera operator who always worked with Louis Gilbert, the director, Alec Mills. And I said, Alec, you got to help me out. I said, you saw that woman that just came in. She was shaking. Did you see her shaking? He said, yeah, I did. I said, it's not going to work. She's afraid of me. She's scared. And he said, well, what do you want me to do? And I said, well, could you just say something to Louis, the director? Just, I've said something, and maybe if you say something too, he'll take it to heart. And so he did. And a couple of days went by, and Louis said, oh, I want you and Diane to go see a movie. It's a French comedy. And there's this gal in there I think would have to be absolutely perfect. And that was the little gal, Blanche Ravaillac, who in this comedy, which by the way was all in French, I couldn't understand a word, but it was very funny in spite of that. It was a very funny movie, very visual. She had some nude scenes and very visual, and she was really quite well put together. And it was a comedy, and her husband, the farmer, was gone into town for the day, and so she's got this guy, and then the farmer comes back early, so she has to push him in the closet, and there's already a guy in there. But anyway, she gets called to come out to the studio, and her agent says, the Bond people want you to come out, and they're thinking about you for a role in the movie. So she's thinking Bond girl, right? And she said, I went out there, and they start putting my hair into pigtails, and putting glasses on me, kind of strapping my chest so it doesn't show up so much. And I'm thinking, what kind of a Bond girl is that? But anyway, to make a long story short, when we saw the rushes, the dailies of this scene, when Jaws meets Dolly, they actually had put in the Romeo and Juliet music, and the lighting was very clever. It bounced off Jaws' teeth when he smiled, and it was very charming. And Cubby Broccoli said to a journalist as we walked out of the screening room, loud enough for me to hear very clearly, he said, Richard and I had quite a falling out about that scene you just saw, but I must say, Richard was absolutely right. And that was, it just, sometimes an actor knows what works, for him, and it did work.
One very quick question, and then I think we've got a few minutes for Q&A from the audience here. Yeah, is Jaws somebody you'd like to have come over for dinner at your house, or would you rather
Absolutely
keep him
not.
in our... No?
Yeah, he would eat the whole dinner, you know. No, it's Jaws is a very bizarre character, and to humanize him was quite a challenge, and to go from a guy who's killing people with his teeth to being having a love interest that was pretty profound. I really enjoyed the challenge in doing that.
Well, you clearly made it yours, so well done.
Oh, thank you.
I think we've got a few minutes. If anybody from the audience has questions or comments, I'm sure. Let's start with Mark Zaid.
So I'm sure this is a question you get all the time, so I might as well throw it out there. So besides the films that you were in, which is your favorite Bond film?
Well, I thought the last film, Skyfall, was very, very good. I thought the villain was fantastic.
Raul Silva.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was really good in No Country for Old Men as well. And what I liked about him was that I saw an interview, and he said, my first Bond film was Moonraker. I saw it with my dad. And he said, I loved the movie. He said, not because of James Bond, but because of Jaws. And so I loved Jaws. And so I think he was kind of trying to make the character that he played in Skyfall, more interesting than he did. It was, he kind of felt like you knew why he was doing what he was doing, and I think that's important.
Right here. Yeah.
Okay.
First row.
So, in addition to the two Bond movies, Jaws has also appeared in, I think it was Everything or Nothing. And correct me if I'm wrong, you had some involvement with that game, the video game?
Well, only that they used my likeness and sent me a check.
Okay. I guess that was, I thought you had done voiceover work or something for that.
No.
Okay.
I did some voice work recently for a movie called Tangled for Disney.
Yeah, that's
I played
great.
the role of the voice of Vladimir.
How would you compare voice acting as opposed to your roles in the Bond films where you don't speak at all except for one line?
Well, it was a lot of fun. They do animated movies totally different from the way they used to them years ago. My experience years ago, they would already make the animated movie, and then you had to match the characters on the screen. So they had like a line that went across, and a beep, beep, and a third beep, you started your line. And it's kind of hard to act under those conditions. Today, with computerized animation, they record all of the dialogue by the actors before, and then they match the action in the animation to the actors speaking. And that's why it's so realistic. I thought Tango, I couldn't believe it when I saw it. It was such a well-done movie, far cry from the old cartoons that Disney used to do. But I'm doing a movie, look for, called Overlord, where I play kind of a Blofeld, Stromberg, Drax type character who's a multi-billionaire who's lost the use of his legs due to trying to save the women and children from the aliens who kill his daughter. And so he uses his wealth to put an end to them, and it's a great role. Oodles of dialogue, lots of really funny lines, and this character has a built-in rocket launcher in his Swedish people mover that he gets around in, and built-in machine gun, and it's a real fun characters.
In the back there.
Tell us a little bit about the Cassius Clay project you're involved with.
Well, about 25 years ago, a producer friend of mine showed me a documentary that he had in progress. His sister worked at Berea College in Berea, Kentucky. And Berea College was the first interracial, non-gender college in America. And Cassius Clay gave the money and 10 acres of land to be able to provide a school for the slaves that he freed on his father was one of the richest men in Kentucky. And when his father died, he willed the management of the state to Cassius. And Cassius freed all the slaves on the plantation. And he built this school for them. And the reason that he did all that was his best friend, as a kid growing up, was a slave named George. And he used to fish with him and hunt with him, wrestle with him, and taught him everything he learned in school, taught him how to play chess. And interestingly enough, he became a legislator in Kentucky and got the Kentuckians to vote a moratorium, no more new slaves in Kentucky. And he founded a newspaper called The True American. And it was an anti-slavery newspaper about 10 miles away from the biggest slave auctions in America. So he really took his life into his own hands to do something about slavery. And they tried to assassinate him twice. And they did kill his son. They poisoned his son, his namesake, Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. And because of all of the things that he did to put an end to slavery, Muhammad Ali's father was named after him. And it was kind of sad because when I read Muhammad Ali's autobiography, The Greatest, he hated the name Cassius Clay. He said it was a slave name. And he says in that book, if there's any white blood in me, it's because some slave master raped a poor slave woman. And genealogists have traced Muhammad Ali's background. And he does have white blood in him. His mother's maiden name was Grady, due to a guy from Ennis, Ireland named Grady who came to America and married a freed black northern slave. And so I managed to get a copy of my historic novel to the Clay family through a family friend, a lady that knew his wife. And they read the book and made a trip to Ennis, Ireland to see the origin of the Grady name. And were greeted by thousands and thousands of Irish people that loved his boxing career and came out to see him. And so hopefully little things like that. I discovered in writing the book, true history, only 7% of the people in the South actually owned slaves. The other 93% were victims of slavery because they couldn't make any money. They had to compete with almost free slave labor. So if you were a white working guy south of the Ohio River, you were poor white trash. And that's how Clay got the people in Kentucky to vote slavery out. No more new slaves could come there. Any slaves born would be free. And interestingly enough, he became our ambassador to Russia. He ran for president at the same time as Abraham Lincoln. And by applause, got the biggest applause at the convention. But he was sort of a hot potato because of his anti-slavery views. And couldn't become vice president or even in the cabinet. But he was named our ambassador to Russia. And a lot of people don't know this, but at that time the Russian Tsar was a Christian and a man who had freed some 23 million slaves in his own country. They were white slaves, serfs they called them. And like Abraham Lincoln, he too was assassinated and killed by the people that wanted to perpetuate slavery in Russia, like Lincoln was killed by people that wanted to perpetuate slavery in America. So I found it to be a very, very interesting and provocative book. And I wrote it with an Academy Award-winning writer who co-wrote the movie Witness with Harrison Ford. So anyway, it's called Kentucky Lion.
We've got time for a couple more here. Gentlemen here.
What are your feelings about the change in Jaws' character in Moonraker from being more sinister and Inspire Love Me to kind of more comedic and eventually turning against Draco?
Well, you know, comedic qualities kind of started in this Fire Love Me. You know, like when the car I'm in goes over the cliff and goes into the house, and Jaws comes out, and the old Italian couple are out there having lunch, and the Italian guy's, "Mamma mia!" You know, and again, you know, Jaws brushes off his clothes, straightens his tie. But yeah, maybe Moonraker was a tad bit more comedic. I think you're right. But I liked it. You know, I liked playing. It was different. I think it would have been a little boring to continue to do the same thing. And but you know, I think that was kind of enough of Jaws probably with the two movies.
Who else here? We must have more. Anybody else? All right, Mark is the last one then.
Did they ever approach you, or you approach them ever again to try and bring whether you back as Jaws or in some other type of cameo role?
No, I think it would require some really clever writing. I mean, in my mind, I see maybe James Bond being chased through a supermarket by people trying to kill him, and Jaws sees that, and maybe he's pushing a baby buggy with his wife. And does something to help him out, you know, a little cameo. It would be fun, but it hasn't happened yet.
Maybe best to let sleeping Jaws lie. So.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's all thank Richard Kiel.